College football nerds here talking Michigan and Texas, the biggest matchup, obviously, in week 2 and the biggest matchup so far this season. And we just want to talk ball with y'all. So I want to remind you, because there are some new faces, especially Texas, Michigan. You know, we're SEC country, and Texas has just showed up in SEC country. Please like, please subscribe. Helps us out a ton. Share this on whatever message board where you talk ball. And Michigan fans are in for a treat because I think Josh is going to have a little commentary on something he said last year on Twitter that made us internet famous among Michigan fans. We'll get to that in a minute. Josh, opening weekend of college football, Texas blew their opponent out. Michigan had some struggle. But there are two things of note here that I think are worth pointing out as we get into this discussion. One, it's week 1, which is overreaction time. We are dead in those waters. But 2, there is a great neutralizer, because if you just look at Michigan and Texas on this, on paper, after these performances in week 1, it's like, oh gosh, Texas is going to kill them. It's a little different when you got to go on the road. I don't care who you are. It's a tough situation. So just talk about out of the gate, like overreactions week 1, how teams play vanilla, things like that. And let's get into this discussion.
Whenever you're starting off the season, a lot of coaches really don't. People say it, don't show the playbook. I think sometimes it's more of an old school mentality in terms of trying to force guys to play at a high level, win one-on-one matchups against inferior teams. They absolutely do play with one hand tied behind their back. One of the more common things is they don't pin and pull a lot. They're just going to rely on zone blocking schemes, stretch plays, get a hat on a hat, try to win one-on-one, and they're not going to try to get numbers. And a lot of times they'll run into numbers almost intentionally until they absolutely have to do otherwise to try to build out a lead. And you see it in a lot of these games. And they're willing to do that all the way into the third quarter. And then, the Oregon game is something I cited in the top 10 as an example where Oregon, I think, realized they needed to turn it on. And they did go down the field and get a touchdown when they needed to get some distance from Idaho when Idaho made it a one-possession game. I think week 1, it's always easy to overreact. I don't know how many times we've seen a team look bad in week 1, sometimes even lose in week 1. Last year, Oklahoma State kind of got torn up by South Alabama, got things fixed up, turned it around, and played better football. So, there's a lot of overreactions. Texas certainly looked better week 1 than Michigan did against the relative competition. But I don't also know how much that really matters at the end of the day. Most of my takeaways are a little more particular about who the players were, how they did, the execution, the talent level, that sort of thing, than it is the actual end results.
So in thinking about this matchup, just like really getting into it early, I do think that what we saw from Michigan offensively is a little bit of who they're going to be this year, or at least a little bit of, we got some insights onto where they struggled, right? Or where they're going to struggle. I'm a little concerned with the scheme, and I'm a little concerned at quarterback. But in general, how much do you think is possible to close a gap in a situation like this where there's like 2 elite teams, 2 top-ranked teams, where one is almost going to have to entirely win on defense? Like, is Michigan maybe playing with one arm tied behind their back enough that they are going to intentionally shorten this game? Do you think that there is a good enough defense out there to truly neutralize where there's that big of a disparity?
Well, first off, I don't know that Michigan is in the same scenario that like Texas A&M ended up looking like against Notre Dame, where it felt like A&M couldn't do anything offensively at times. The quarterback play just wasn't good enough. Frankly, I had that game wrong in the preview. I did not expect them to just flat out miss as many throws. They had, I think, 2 interceptions in that game that are just misses. Nothing more than just bad quarterback play, and that's not who I expected based on who Wegman had been pre-injury. Warren for Michigan struggled, but he didn't struggle as much, I think, as some people might think. I thought he did pretty well throwing the football and hitting his marks. I just didn't think it was very flashy, and more importantly, I thought the offense itself wasn't very flashy or innovative. I don't know how much of that is stuff being held back, how much of it is who they are with the talent that's available. But I think in terms of how you can win, and let's just assume for a moment that Michigan is a defense-only football team. you can win really close, tough games playing defensive football. I always done it to a lot of teams for a lot of years. And if that's the way you need to be, yeah, you have to play complementary football. You have to lean on the run game, which Florida State, Georgia Tech, right? BCF Toys and Brian Fremeau, a friend of our channel, talked about how that was the fewest number of possessions in college football in the past several years. They only played 7 possessions each of any game. And to have it in a marquee game is kind of remarkable because usually those super short games are actually blowouts where somebody shortens the game up for various reasons, or a triple option game, something like that. And that can happen now. The clock doesn't stop with first downs. So if you run the ball, and you're getting first downs at any sort of decent clip, that whole possession, literally the whole possession, the clock just never stops. And games can get really short. And you can shorten games to an extent you couldn't do 5 years ago. But I also think a lot of times it depends on the opposing offense and what they're able to do. Because something we've talked about a lot is an explosive, high-power RPO offense has the ability to score a lot of points on virtually anyone. That was a rhetoric we'd had from about 2018 through a couple years ago. And our point was, look, you can't play this kind of style defensive football against a top-tier team and expect to win. You just can't do it. You have to be able to score a lot of points because someone that's that good is going to score points on you because the rules favor the offense. And this is where I think things have changed a little bit. And, I think Mentor at Michigan was a big part of that in some of the schemes he brought down, a lot of which were very heavily influenced by the NFL. Defensive football has started to catch up with offensive football. And I think the defining trait there for what these teams are and how they want to operate is that you tend to be a lot more aggressive. You play zone defense in the back end. You blitz heavily. You mix up your coverage looks. Split field is all the rage in the NFL, and I think the better defensive teams are doing it. And it's a pressure-based, zone-based scheme, kind of the opposite of the Nick Saban style of defense. And Michigan's been very effective with that. And it really has taken away a lot of the RPO stuff because those big shot plays are caught by the zone coverage, and then a lot of the underneath stuff or a lot of the big deep shots you want to take, you generate enough pressure that you don't have those opportunities. And I think it's proven to be a more effective scheme. We talked about with Alabama switching to a scheme far more like Michigan than they'd ever been. They look like a completely different defense in week 1. Look totally different. And so I do think it's a lot more possible today to do that than it was even 2 or 3 years ago. So I think it is possible to be a defense-first football team and to shut down even somebody like Texas if you play on a high enough level to be able to win the game in a close game.
So, going into this, I was trying to think of obviously where I was going to pick this game, and I'm not ready to pick it yet, but I do want to talk about what Vegas thinks about this game because, and I think this gets into the week 1 overreaction stuff that we have. Like right now, obviously, I said, and we did a top 10 video. It was a lot of fun. We really enjoy those because we just kind of get to talk ball a little bit. But I talked about how, like, if you look at Texas' performance against a mediocre team, you can't learn much. But Texas played a mediocre team. Ohio State played a mediocre team. Texas did better against their mediocre team. So I'm going to rank them ahead of Ohio State. I might shuffle that around a little bit, but that's what I'm going to do. Michigan did not play well at all against a mediocre team. I don't think they played Akron, right? Like that. It's not that bad. It's also week 1, under a new coach, under a new staff, under new quarterback. Like you're breaking in so many pieces, but we see that. And the initial reaction is to overreact and say, goodness, Texas is just going to drill them because they're a well-oiled machine at this point under Sark. But Josh, I pull it up right now and Texas is favored by, it just moved up to 7. It was 6.5. It just moved up to 7. Over-under's 48.5. Looking at that, what's your takeaway there? Just from what Vegas is saying.
I think my takeaway there has a lot to do with what I just said. I think the defense at Michigan is really exceptional. Buried in that performance and the way that it's viewed, as I said, Keene had a couple big plays. He ended up 6.5 yards per attempt, but a lot of that was kind of 1 or 2 almost freak plays that happened. It took a lot for them to move the ball at all. I thought defensively Michigan looked phenomenal. They had the big touchdown to end the game, right, with Will Johnson at corner sort of saving the day, and he'd rotated in and out. So I think when they lock it down, they're going to be able to give Texas a game. And I'll also say, maybe this is a chance to get more into the analytical side of it. There were some things about that game from Texas that weren't necessarily spotless to me. In the game against Colorado State, you could tell that they were outmatched on the back end. Ewers is consistently been a better passer at the short to intermediate game than he is the deep game. He struggles with touch on his deep ball. And in that game, the way it played out, they were able to get...
Unless he's playing Alabama.
Yeah, except that game for sure. Well, a couple others. There are games where you hit... But that's the thing, right? If you're an inconsistent deep passer, that doesn't mean you can't complete deep passes. So there are going to be games where you hit 2 or 3 of them. Just you call it random luck, right? But it's just like throwing darts at a dartboard. If you're not very accurate, it doesn't mean you never hit a bullseye. And he isn't awful. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying he's not gonna complete 80+% of those passes over 30 yards. I felt like the receivers weren't at the same level they were last year. I didn't feel like the separation was at the same level it had been. I didn't feel like the run game was at the same level it had been. And as I said in our top 10 preview, which you should go look at that if you want to see our top 10 from week 1, just kind of a fun video to talk about the landscape of football. You could tell also that I think that the run defense wasn't at the same level. They weren't getting the same push. They weren't just absolutely stoning Colorado State the way they were the year prior. And that, to me, with Michigan, they want to play the slow style of football, but the question is, can you run the ball? Football is always about scheme. It's always about opportunity. And I think Michigan may have the opportunity to run the ball enough to kind of keep Texas honest and to be able to move the football on Texas enough to score some points. And that's enough to keep it close. So the fact that Texas looked better against their weak competition, great, wonderful. But I can see the edges that maybe Vegas is seeing as well. Knowing some of it, people are going to say it's about balancing money. It's about balancing money, but it's a lot of it's power ratings and sharp projections because a lot of the money comes from sharps. And they are trying to more or less game where they think the point spread should be. I think that's why it is where it is.
Yeah, and I also think that, the adage is that home field advantage is worth 3 points. I don't agree with that. I think it's a sliding scale, and I think big-time games with, even Alabama losing to Texas last year, I feel like, at that point in the season, Texas was a lot more than whatever they won that game by, pulled away late in the fourth quarter, a lot more better, I'm not saying more better, than Alabama, but, playing on the road is tough and has a great neutralizer. My concern for Michigan in this game is that they might hit a situation where they just can't let that run game breathe at all. And yes, Texas is turning over, really good talent, interior defensive line. I wonder if they're not going to be able to run the ball because they just don't have anything at quarterback. That's a concern of mine, is that, even if you have a great run game, I think A&M's got the potential to have a pretty good run game, but they're so deficient at quarterback, and Notre Dame didn't care at all that they not only were playing single high safety, but they were playing everybody everybody else was within 6 yards of the line of scrimmage. And so even if you have a good run game, you have good running backs, that's tough for me. So tell me what you think about that. Is it a situation where I think this is an interesting thing. Tell me where you think the score's got to be, what the range has got to be for Michigan to win this game, and tell me what the scores looks like if you think Michigan's in trouble.
I think Michigan needs this to be a game scoring somewhere under 27 points. I think when you get to 4 touchdowns, that's going to be a tall task. And again, they moved the ball some. I thought Loveland was the whole offense in that opener. It was the one guy Fresno State couldn't stop, and you can tell Daniel's distracted because USC just took the lead off to the corner. We're both a little bit distracted, if I'm being honest, in the fourth quarter here. The thing is, though, if you're going to try to run an offense through a tight end, even a really good tight end, it's hard to do that and be overly explosive. And if you're not explosive, you have to have long drives. And if you have long drives, and this was Oregon's problem really against Idaho, the longer the drive, the more opportunity for the other team to have create a negative play and to stop you. Because you got to get first down, first down, first down, first down. You take one sack, you have one drop, you have one penalty, and then that can cause you to punt. And it's just more opportunities for that to happen, which Oregon moved the ball pretty consistently on Idaho, but they had no explosivity. So the drives are very long, and eventually they would do something, shoot themselves in the foot, give up a sack, have a penalty, and then they'd end up punting. And then before they knew it, the game was shortened because they were running so much, because the drives, when your drives are long now, because we don't stop after first downs, games get really short because the clock's running the entire time, especially if you have a lot of completions and short completions. All of a sudden you can end up in trouble, or you end up in a short game. So I think Michigan wants this to be a game under 27 points, kind of like where USC LSU is right now, and they can play and operate in that space. If it gets over that mark, now what that means is there's more explosive plays going on. It means you need to be more explosive, and I think they're going to be out of their comfort zone at that point. I think that means you've got to throw the ball more. At least you feel pressured to, because you feel like you need to score almost every possession. And I don't think that's where they're at. I don't think that's where Warren is at as a passer based on the first week. I thought he did a good job operating within the system, but not much more. Orji didn't play a whole lot, and look, if he was going to be the main guy against Texas, there is no way in my mind that they would have not played him more. I saw why they didn't play him more. He is a useful running quarterback in certain sets. His passing, he only threw a few passes, weren't very good or very consistent. Now, small sample size, maybe that's not indicative. But as good as an athlete and as good as he is, at this level, he's not actually, to be blunt, he's not fast enough. He's a big, powerful guy, but he's not explosive enough. He's not fast enough to really create that spark, and so he's got to be a good passer. And you can lean on a guy like him in a low-scoring game to get a couple big third downs, a third and short or something. You don't want to be leaning on him in a game where you got to score every drive and where you need explosives and you got to score in the 30s. So I think it needs to be a game under 27 points. Game well short of 30. A game where the run game matters a little more for Texas, who's had injury issues obviously there, and maybe that plays out as a problem. Maybe a game where you're putting more pressure on those Texas receivers to make routine plays, rather than letting them take the speed and the sort of the scheme and experience of Ewers and make it a more high-flying, explosive offense kind of game.
So one other thing I want to talk about before we get into score predictions, I talked about Texas being able to neutralize a good run game if Michigan can't throw. There's a lot of talk about Bond transferring from Alabama to Texas this year. I think that the production they got actually Saturday was, I think he had 60 yards or whatever, but I was actually more impressed with some of the other pieces. But I do think they've taken a step back, which is not that's not a salacious thing to say. They lost talent at wide receiver, and that talent's doing well in the NFL. There is a potential in my mind for this really good secondary to shut down that pass game. And I wonder if Texas can run on Michigan enough to win the game. Can they run their way into those 4 touchdowns that they need? That's a curious matchup for me. We don't do a lot of straight-up matchups. But what do you think the possibility, let's play a hypothetical. What do you think the possibility of Michigan holding Texas to 230 yards passing on 6.8 per?
I mean, I think it's quite possible. I think the problem for Texas in this game is that Michigan's probably going to be one of the premier run defenses in the country, if not the best run defense in the country. Trying to move the ball on more Graham, and Stewart, whoever's there on the front, it's tough. I won't say it's impossible, but it's at least as hard as it was to move the ball in Texas last year, which most teams couldn't do it. And so they could take away the run game entirely from Texas. And if you can do that, now you can make Texas one-dimensional. Now you can pin your ears back and you can try to rush the passer in 3rd and long. And Ewers has not always been great in those must-throw situations in terms of making reads and dealing with pressure. It's a very different ball game for him, and he's had some bad games. So I could see him having a really rough performance. However good the receivers aren't And I am kind of with you. I think they miss. I thought Sanders was a great security blanket at tight end, and I don't know that they quite have that. I thought Worthy was a guy that would get you a couple touchdowns a game from deep shots, and between him and A.D. Mitchell at least. And I don't know that they really have that right now. And so if they're able to generate pressure and they've got to create true separation and they need real explosives, I think they could have problems. And so, yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's a path for Michigan to win. And look, I think we're all kind of circling these issues and talking around them because we don't really know, right? We just don't know. And there are a lot of probably podcasts that are going to be a lot more definitive in these answers, and we're not being definitive because we try to operate on what we know and what we think to be true, and everything else right now is an unknown. And so the question really is just how does it turn out? And I think the fact that Vegas thinks it is a close-ish game tells you that this margin isn't indicative of what happened in week one. Tells you that Michigan has a good chance to win. Tells you that, I think defensively they're going to give Texas a lot of issues. And Daniel, do you mind if I go ahead and sort of lead into my score here?
Yeah, and one thing that's crazy is you didn't even mention Jordan Whittington. Like in all of that receiver discussion, talking about what they lost, like I think it's a fair point. And like we said in our top 10, that doesn't mean you can't show that you've replaced that or that you've grown into something else. But right now, to your point, it's an unknown for us. And if anybody's being honest, it's an unknown for them as well. So yeah, I think it's a totally fair point and a good opportunity for Michigan. Give me your score and let's talk about it.
Yeah, so let's get into the discussion here because I think personally this game is going to be a close, low-scoring game, but not close enough. I have it 27-17, so I have Texas by 10. I think the game may actually feel closer than that, but I think the issue is I do think Michigan's going to struggle to score. Going into week one, Daniel, I will tell you, I was expecting to pick Michigan in this game. Based on my research and where I had these teams preseason, we didn't do a team preview for these two teams because we knew we were going to be discussing them in week two. I was ready to pick Michigan in this game. That is what I expected to do. So there is a big flip to me of where these teams are based on week one. I was not impressed with Michigan's offense. I had concerns about where they were just due to the quarterback position and how important it is. And I came out even more concerned. I mean, 4.7 yards per attempt in the opener against Fresno. Texas is a better defense than that. I didn't even necessarily think Warren was that bad in and of himself. I just wasn't impressed with the offensive line. I wasn't impressed with the skill players that were there. I wasn't impressed with the quarterbacks. And even the run game and the running backs weren't wowing me. And I think it's going to take more than that to do a lot on Texas. And I think Texas probably can be beat in the secondary by a better team. But I don't think Michigan is there right now. And that's why I have Texas 27-17. But again, I do fully believe there's a possibility where Michigan's defense that I thought was excellent in that Fresno State game, that they come in and shut Texas down. And that's their path to win. But I'm just not prepared to say against a team like Texas, you're ever going to really hold them that low. They've got too many weapons, and football does favor offense a little too much. So I do think if Michigan kind of plays their game and Texas plays their game, Texas is going to be able to score more points than I think Michigan's going to be able to match.
So I was prepared to pick Texas in a closer game before I saw the Fresno game. And my thought is, I have two thoughts here. One, it is very possible that Michigan was also very vanilla because Michigan and Alabama, in particular, and in some ways Ohio State, but a little less, have this unique opportunity where they're bringing in new coordinators, new schemes, in Michigan and Alabama's case, new head coaches. So you only get one shot to use that trump card of you don't really know what to prepare for with me. You don't know how I'm going to scheme in certain situations, how I'm going to react. You don't know what I'm going to call. You only have one chance to surprise a team who can't fully prepare for you because you don't have the tape yet. So that is in the back of my mind as a possibility of why Michigan was not so great last week. But I think that you don't let Fresno be on your 20-yard line with 5 minutes left in the game, down 7 points or whatever, 10 points, going into score before you get that pick six. I don't think you do that to that extent. So I don't think it's just hiding the playbook. I think there are some real problems at quarterback. I think that this Michigan team can grow into and is going to see a lot of growth because it's a new regime there. But those guys, both personnel, players, and staff, are learning on the job right now. And Texas is more of a well-oiled machine. I've got Texas 34, Michigan 20, and I wouldn't be surprised if that separation is a little more. And here's why. Texas's struggles have been against teams who can throw the ball on them. When Alabama beat them a couple of years ago, TCU beat them a couple of years ago, it was because the quarterback made some plays, and that was the difference in the game because Texas was shutting that run game down. Washington last year threw for 11 yards an attempt against Texas, but ran it for pretty terrible 3.3. Texas's defense has had problems under Sark, but you can only capitalize on those if you have a dynamic quarterback and a dynamic passing game, and I don't think that Michigan has that yet. I don't know that we're going to see it this year. It's possible they grow into it. I don't think they have the right type of makeup in where their deficiencies are and their strengths are to take advantage of Texas. I think it's a bad matchup for them. 34-20 is my pick in this game. Josh, you wanted to take the floor for just a minute to talk about something, and I'm just going to let you have it.
So, we've, I think, taken a lot of heat, some fairly and a lot fairly and some unfairly, for positions on sign stealing and stuff we've said on Twitter and everything and involved with that. Our positions are what they are in terms of whether or not we think, Michigan cheated by doing that or didn't cheat. But the thing I want to specifically address is, we probably made some comments that were pretty stupid or went too far. One in particular is when news break that potentially South Carolina had gotten signals from Michigan and then used it in that game against Tennessee. We were tweeting about it, and I very stupidly wrote a tweet that said, the outcome of that game was that Hendon Hooker, tore his ACL. And that definitely came across as saying Michigan was responsible for him getting hurt in the game. It wasn't what I meant, but I'm a smart enough person to know better than to say it the way I did. And I want to just have a mea culpa because that was stupid. I don't agree with it. It wasn't a responsibility. I will say that when I sent that tweet, I was headed out the door to help my wife with something. I'm in the car. I look at it, see the responses, and go, "Oh crap! This isn't what I meant to say." And I tried to immediately put a reply to say, "Hey, to be clear, I'm not saying Michigan's responsible. I was just trying to say, hey, the outcome of that game, if people don't realize it, is that's the game where Tennessee's starting quarterback got hurt." But I should have deleted the tweet. I should have apologized. I should have owned it more directly at that point in time. I didn't do those things. That's on me. It was a stupid thing to say. I didn't really agree with it then. I certainly don't agree with it now. So I just wanted to own that in front of Michigan fans right now.
See, unlike Josh Pate, we own our losses. I think that if you come to our account without a lot of previous context, you would take it a certain way. If you had a lot of context with us over the years, you would know really what you were trying to say. But look, I'm cool with it. Like I think that if I have to have every one of my tweets under a microscope, there's going to be some stuff that I'm not taking down. I'm not deleting it. Also, unlike Josh Pate. But I also don't know that I would love it. All right, y'all. That's it for us. We had fun with this one. Please let us know in the comments where we are wrong, maybe where we are right. Remember, subscribe, give us some love. Help us to have a great week, and I hope you do as well. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. God bless.